After my husband's death, I kept quiet about the fact that he had signed the entire company over to me. At the memorial service, my son smirked and said, "Mom, I'm the boss now. Your place is cleaning my office bathroom." He had no idea what surprise was waiting for him at the office the very next morning. 40 days. They say on the 40th day, the soul finally says its final farewell to the earthly world. I sat deep in an armchair in the parlor of our Hamptons estate, and it felt as if it was my soul preparing to follow him, my Victor. The house was packed with soft voices and the muted clink of glassware, yet I felt like I was behind glass, observing a silent play. Everyone offered the same empty words. Maya, stay strong. They saw me as a well-kept accessory to Victor's genius, the woman who orchestrated dinner parties and selected linens for 40 years. None of them knew that during those dinners, while they whispered over wine, I was the social glue finalizing the most critical deals. Victor used to say, "Maya, I build the walls, but you fill the house with life. Without you, it's just a stone box." Now the box felt empty. In my lap rested a slim folder of embossed leather, Victor's final wish. The official will was predictable, splitting the estate and accounts. But the company? The sterling reserve wasn't in the official papers. It was here, in this folder. 100% of the shares passed to my sole ownership, his final gift, his final trust. I overheard two women whispering by the fireplace. Poor Maya. Victor managed everything. She was just his wife. I wasn't offended. They were merely voicing what my own son, Grant, thought. I watched him across the room, animated and smirking, already trying on his father's legacy for size. Victor always said of Grant, "He has my drive, but little of your soul. He sees numbers, not people." Part 2. The Cold Betrayal. Grant headed toward me, blocking the light of the floor lamp. His voice had a metallic edge I'd never heard before. "Mom, we need to talk." He led me toward the buffet, not out of care, but out of cold calculation. "Starting tomorrow, I officially take over," he began, popping expensive caviar into his mouth as if it were his birthright. "Dad's office is mine. You'll need to clear out. I plan to redecorate and host corporate receptions here. You'll move into the city penthouse. It's smaller, but it'll be enough for just you." He said it so casually, evicting me from the home I'd lived in for 4 decades. When I remained silent, he mistook it for weakness. He wiped his fingers and added the final sting. "You'll have a pension, but sitting idle is bad for your age. You need to stay engaged. You can start by tidying up my office bathroom." In that instant, the world froze. The scent of lilies vanished. My son hadn't just insulted me. He had trampled on 40 years of partnership and love. I realized then that the man standing before me was a stranger who would destroy everything Victor held dear. The fight for inheritance hadn't begun. The fight for honor had. I walked away without a word. That night, I sat in Victor's study, breathing in the scent of sandalwood and old books. Grant thought the company was a machine of assets and logistics. He didn't understand that Victor built a family that stretched from Brussels to Sri Lanka. This is why I didn't call the lawyers. Showing him the will would be too easy. I had to speak to him in the language he never learned. I opened my personal notebook, my spiderweb, as Victor called it. I called Charlotte in Brussels, Mr. Sundareem in Sri Lanka, and Monsieur Laurent in France. These weren't just suppliers. They were friends bound by honor, not just contracts. To them, the company was Victor and Maya. Everything else was just words on paper. As I hung up the final call, I knew. My web was now a net, and the hunter was about to become the prey. Part 3. The New Empire. I sat in the study until dawn, waiting for the sound of the front door closing. That was the sound of Grant's triumph beginning. I can imagine his first day at the office. He likely walked in, ignoring the legacy in the air, seeing only the smell of money. The first thing he did was take down Victor's portrait, the soul of the office, and prop it against the wall like junk. In its place, he hung a glossy, arrogant photo of himself. Then came Arthur Vance, the CFO, wearing his usual mask of loyalty. "Spare me the sentiment, Arthur," I can hear Grant saying. "Dad's methods are outdated. It's time to optimize, time to clean house." He sat in his father's chair, though it was far too large for him. First order of business, cut costs. Our suppliers have dictated prices for decades behind fairy tales of handmade quality. Enough. Arthur Shirley chimed in. I agree, but those old-timers are touchy. Victor spent years building those friendships. Grant laughed that cold, unpleasant laugh. He bought that friendship with our money. My mother handled all those tea parties and phone calls. Think of the wasted hours. That inefficiency ends now. If they want to stay with the need motivation vision of a modern empire, they play by my rules, or they are out. He thought he was the king of a new world. He didn't realize that while he was busy hanging his portrait, the foundation of his empire had already moved beneath his feet. He wanted a war. He was about to get one. I imagined him leaning back in the chair, and the same disdain I heard yesterday at the buffet table was in his voice. She's just a sentimental old woman, Arthur, and she surrounded herself with the same dinosaurs. She thinks her friendship will pay our bills. But you and I know that the world is ruled not by smiles, but by money. Hard, cold cash. So, what do you propose? In Arthur's voice, I'm sure there was the genuine interest of a predator sniffing blood. It's simple. You'll prepare a standard email right now for all key suppliers. Charlotte in Brussels, the tea merchant in Sri Lanka, the French with their caviar, short and to the point. Due to a change in leadership and new company commercial policy, we demand a 20% reduction in purchasing prices across the entire assortment. New terms are effective immediately. That's it. No courtesies, no dear partners. This is business. They either accept our terms or we'll find others. No one is indispensable. Arthur must have frozen for a moment. Even for him, this was too radical. Grant, it's risky. They might take offense. These aren't corporations. They're family businesses. They are businessmen. Grant cut him off. And they know how to count money. They'll complain for show. They'll whine about a tough life. But when the prospect of losing their largest client looms over them, they'll become agreeable. Trust me, the old guard is gone. A new era, an era of efficiency has begun. I can imagine Arthur looking at the new portrait on the wall, then at Grant's confident face, and a slow, understanding smile blossoming on his lips. He saw strength, or rather what he mistook for strength. You're right, he said, and his voice became smooth and anxious again. Absolutely right. It's time to shake up this sleepy kingdom. I'll prepare the draft email immediately. Perfect. Grant must have nodded with satisfaction. Send it out today. Enough sitting around while my mother plays solitaire at the estate and mourns the past. We are building the future. He was wrong about only one thing. I wasn't playing solitaire. I was waiting precisely for this, their fatal, arrogant mistake. That day, from our office, from the heart of my husband's company, a flurry of short, soulless emails scattered across the globe. Every word in them was an insult. Every figure was a slap in the face of 40 years of friendship and trust. They hit send, certain they were launching a mechanism of optimization. They had no idea they had launched a mechanism of self-destruction. The crashing tide. I wasn't wrong in my expectations. The replies to my son's ultimatum began to arrive the very next day. Or rather, it was an absolutely devastating, icy silence. No one called. No one wrote back to the rude electronic order. In the world of big corporations where Grant lived, silence meant consent or the start of negotiation. But in our world, the world of Mr. Sundaram, Mr. Laurent, and Charlotte Dubois, silence was the most terrible verdict. It was a sign of contempt, a sign that you had ceased to exist. I knew that Grant and Arthur at the office interpreted this silence as their victory. They were surely sitting in Victor's study, sipping cognac and congratulating each other on a clever move. See, Arthur, I told you they swallowed it. Now they'll know their place. Their smugness was so predictable that I could feel it even here, miles away in the silence of our estate. I was doing what I always did, caring for the life in this house. I was repotting Victor's favorite orchids. He used to say they were like me, fragile on the outside, but with an unbreakable inner core. I carefully cleaned the roots, prepared the fresh soil, and this measured familiar work was calming. It was real, unlike the false, hurried rat race currently happening at the company. The phone call caught me off guard. I recognized the number. Brussels. My heart paused for a moment, then began to beat steadily and strongly. It had begun. May. Charlotte's voice on the line was unrecognizable. It wasn't just serious like last time. It was hard as steel, ringing with suppressed fury. Yes, Charlotte, I'm listening. I got it. This letter from your son. She spat the words out as if they were poison. It's not even a letter, it's a slap in the face. A 20% demand immediately after 35 years of partnership, after everything between our families. Does he think we're faceless conveyor belt suppliers? Does he think my chocolate is just cocoa beans and sugar that can be assessed by stock market quotes? I remained silent, letting her vent. Her anger was justified. It was the anger of a person whose honor had been insulted. My husband, God rest his soul, would turn over in his grave if he saw this. Victor and I worked on a handshake for 20 years before we signed the first official contract because his word was more reliable than any paperwork. And this boy, I know, Charlotte, I said quietly. I know everything. And I'm so sorry you had to read that. Sorry, May. I'm not sorry. I'm furious, she exclaimed. I've already prepared the official response, a termination of all shipments. My chocolate will never appear in your stores again. Not while. She suddenly stopped, took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. But I'm not calling about that, she said in a different tone. Quiet, tense, full of dread. That letter was just an insult. But what happened an hour later, that's something else entirely. I froze with the orchid pot in my hands, dirt scattered onto the floor, but I didn't notice. What happened, Charlotte? I received an official request from the legal department of OmniP. At those words, the cold that had only thinly crusted over my grief pierced me right through to the heart. OmniOrp, the cheap, faceless conglomerate that bought up famous brands and sucked the soul out of them. They left only the name, and under it they sold mass-reduced low-grade products made in gigantic automated factories. Victor hated them with all his heart. He called them the gravediggers of quality. They don't create Maya. He'd often say they only destroy. They take the history, the reputation, the life's work of true masters, and they turn it into dust. A line in a quarterly report. It's the worst kind of barbarism. Barbarism in a business suit. What did they want? My voice sounded hollow as if from a well. They wanted confirmation of the terms of my exclusive contract with the Sterling Reserve, Charlotte said slowly, distinctly articulating every word. They informed me they are in the final stages of a merger and acquisition of your company. They plan to buy you out, May, completely. They wanted to make sure the contracts with key suppliers, that is me, would remain in force after the change of ownership. May, what in the hell is going on over there? I sank onto a side table. The pot slipped from my hands and shattered, scattering soil and the orchid's pale, delicate roots across the floor. But I didn't hear the sound. I only heard the deafening roar in my ears. This wasn't just betrayal. It was desecration. Grant and Arthur, they didn't just want to take the company from me. They didn't just want to kick me out of the house and humiliate me. It was much worse. They had planned from the beginning to sell Victor's life's work to his fiercest enemy, the one he despised most in the world. They were going to take his name, his reputation, his legacy, and hand it over to the gravediggers of quality. And now I understood everything. Their haste, their cruelty. The demand for a 20% discount wasn't just greed. It was pre-sale preparation. They wanted to show OmniP they could optimize costs and squeeze even more profit from the suppliers. They were boosting the company's investment appeal before slaughtering it like a hog at a fair. And Arthur Vance, the family friend, he was there the whole time. He looked me in the eye at the memorial, offered words of sympathy, and behind my back, he was cutting deals with the murderers of Victor's business. He manipulated my son, playing on his greed and vanity, to pull off this transaction and line his own pockets. My blood turned to ice. The pain from Grant's words at the memorial was nothing compared to this. That was a blow against me. This was a stab in Victor's back. The dead cannot defend themselves. They cannot uphold their honor. Then I must. The battle for the company was over before it began. Now this was a war for my husband's soul. And in this war, I had no right to lose. Charlotte, my dear. My voice was calm, but it held a firmness she didn't expect from me. I ask one thing of you. Don't send any official replies yet. Do something else. Tell everyone. Tell all our mutual friends about this request from OmniCorp. Call Mr. Sundaram. Call Mizzy Laron. They need to know the fate plan for the business we all served. They need to know that their names and reputations are about to be sold at auction. A pause followed on the other end, and then I heard a quiet, almost a ruck gasp. I hear you, May, Charlotte said. and in her voice there was no longer anger. There was the cold, calculating fury of an ally. Consider it done. The gravediggers won't get this feast. After that conversation, I hung up and went out to the garden. The day was clear and cool. I picked up my shears and walked to the rose bushes. This was my ritual, my sanctuary. By trimming the faded blooms and dry branches, I wasn't just tidying the bushes. I was tidying my thoughts. Each snip of the blades echoed in the silence like a metronome, counting down the last hours of the old world. I knew that across the invisible threads of my spiderweb, the news was flying from Brussels to Sri Lanka, from there to France to Italy to Spain. This was not a business message. It was a cry for help. An alarm signal passed from one old friend to another. News of betrayal that the Sterling Reserve was in danger, that it was about to be ransacked by barbarians. I knew what the answer would be: the unveiling. Meanwhile, in a sterile glass conference room somewhere in downtown Manhattan, my son was celebrating his victory. I didn't see it, but I can imagine every moment of his triumph. He stood at the head of a long table of dark, polished wood. Before him were three people in equally expensive, faceless suits, the OmniP leadership. They had the same watches, the same tight smiles, and the same dead eyes. The eyes of people for whom the world consisted only of numbers, charts, and stock tickers. Grant surely felt he was on top of the world. He was proud. He was showing them a presentation on the massive screen, slides flipped by logistics optimization, profit growth, potential, brand synergies. He rattled off these empty foreign words, not understanding that behind every percentage on his charts stood people's lives, generations of masters, centuries of tradition. He was selling them something he hadn't created, and he wasn't even attempting to understand the value of what he sold. And as you can see, gentlemen, he proclaimed, pointing a laser pointer at a chart, after the work we conducted with our suppliers, we project a 20% reduction in procurement costs as early as this quarter. This frees up our capital and makes the Sterling Reserve an even more attractive asset. He surely paused, expecting applause. The OmniP people didn't applaud. They only nodded almost imperceptibly. To them, this was routine. At that moment, his phone lying on the table vibrated. The screen showed Sam Jones, warehouse manager. Grant frowned. What an inappropriate interruption during his moment of glory. He dismissed the call with a swipe of his finger without even looking. Thus he continued, restoring his self-satisfied smile. We are handing you over, not just a company. We are handing you a finely tuned mechanism with enormous potential. And most importantly, exclusive long-term contracts for the world's finest delicacies. This is our greatest treasure. The phone vibrated again. Persistent. Sam Jones, warehouse manager. The irritation on Grant's face was now undisguised. How dare some warehouse clerk distract him when the fate of millions was being decided? He dismissed the call again and pointedly placed the phone face down. One of the men in suits slightly raised an eyebrow. Grant was already opening his mouth to deliver the concluding, most bombastic part of his speech, but he didn't get to finish. The conference room door burst open. Standing in the doorway was Sam Jones, an older man who had worked with Victor for 30 years, pale, bewildered in his work jacket. He looked like an alien in this kingdom of glass and polished wood. Mr. Holloway, he gasped, ignoring the icy stares of the OmniP men. Sam Jones, are you insane? Grant hissed, his face red with fury and shame. I'm in a meeting. Get out of here. The ships? The old man stammered, not hearing him. The ships? They turned around. A silence fell, so thick and heavy it felt tangible. What? Grant asked, not believing his ears. All of them, every single one. Sam Jones's voice trembled. The port just called and a notice came from Brussels, from Ceylon. A refusal of all shipments. All cargo is halted. The ships that were already at sea are turning around. Grant stood and stared at him silently. The color slowly drained from his face, leaving behind a deathly pallor. The confident smile slipped away, revealing the confusion of a small boy. Behind him, the slide with the profit growth chart still glowed on the huge screen. Now it looked like a cruel joke. The OmniP men exchanged silent glances. There was no sympathy or surprise in their eyes, only cold, sober calculation. One of them slowly, almost lazily, closed his laptop. The click sounded like a gunshot in the dead silence. It seems, he said in a level, indifferent voice, addressing his colleagues, not Grant, that the subject of negotiations has been exhausted. Their deal was built on one single foundation, the exclusive supplier contracts they couldn't get on their own, without Belgian chocolate, without French caviar, without Celine's tea. The Sterling Reserve was just an empty building with a beautiful name, and now that building had collapsed. My son's humiliation was complete, and worst of all for him, public. He stood amid the ruins of his triumph, before the people to whom he had just sold greatness, but in the end had demonstrated only his own. The surprise had begun. The verdict. I didn't hear them leave. I didn't see my son, pale and crushed, standing alone in the conference room that should have been his moment of victory. But I knew what would follow. Anger, confusion, and then the search for someone to blame. And in their distorted worldview, anyone could be blamed, but themselves. I waited for them in the garden. I wasn't hiding. I was simply where I belonged in my world, which I had created and nurtured for decades. The sun warmed my shoulders. The air was thick with the sweet, honeyed scent of the blooming roses. I held a small pair of gardening shears and methodically clipped the spent blossoms to give strength to the new ones. This work demanded attention and calm. It did not tolerate haste. I heard them long before I saw them. First, the furious squeal of tires at the estate gates, a sound utterly foreign to this place. Then, the car doors slammed shut so hard it sounded like they'd been kicked open. Gravel crunched under quick, heavy footsteps. They didn't enter the house. They burst into it. "Mom!" Grant's shout echoed through the first floor and spilled out onto the terrace. "Where are you?" I didn't answer. I carefully cut a deep burgundy, almost black rose, a black baccara, and placed it in my woven basket. A moment later, they appeared on the path leading to the rose garden. They looked like two cornered animals. Grant was disheveled, his jacket unbuttoned, his tie pulled to the side. His face was distorted by a grimace of fury and despair. Arthur followed him, trying to maintain some composure, but his darting eyes and deathly pour betrayed his panic. They stopped a few feet from me, breathing heavily. Their aggressive energy invaded the harmony of my garden like a dissonant chord. "Mom, what did you do?" Grant shouted again, unable to control himself. His voice cracked. "What did you tell them?" I slowly straightened up, turned to him, and looked him straight in the eye. My gaze was calm. I felt neither fear nor anger, only cold, heavy pity. "What are you talking about, Grant?" "Don't pretend. The suppliers, they all canceled. Every single one. Contracts are torn up. Shipments are stopped. You called them. You ruined everything." He waved his arms as if trying to shake the answers out of the air. Arthur put a hand on his shoulder, trying to calm him, but more likely seeking support. "Ms. Holloway," Arthur began in his ingratiating voice, which now contained a steel tremor. "We are in a very serious situation. The company is paralyzed." Mr. Holloway spoke hastily, but essentially he is right. "We know you talked to our partners. We ask you." "No. We demand that you call them immediately and smooth over this misunderstanding. You have to fix this. You have to." His words carried an order, a humiliated lackey, suddenly fancying himself a lord. I shifted my gaze from my son's rage-filled face to the tense face of the family friend, and then I turned back to the rose bush and with one precise, careful movement, clipped another faded flower. The snip of the shears sounded deafeningly loud in the silence that followed. "I didn't call them to cancel anything, Grant," I said quietly, but my voice carried throughout the garden. "I called them as a friend to say goodbye." Grant froze, looking at me confused. "Say goodbye? What are you talking about? What friendship? This is business. You don't understand any of this. You messed everything up with your senioritis. It is you who didn't understand, son," I replied just as calmly. I placed the shears in the basket and looked at both of them. "Neither of you understood. You thought your father's company was walls, warehouses, and numbers and reports. But it is people. It is the trust he built for 40 years. Trust that you destroyed in 2 days. I didn't tell them to cancel shipments. I simply let them know that the old world of the Sterling Reserve no longer existed, and they chose not to deal with the new one." "That's a lie," Grant screamed. "They would never do that over some sentimental nonsense. You talked them into something. You slandered me."